broadcasting along the River Otter and at the heart of East Devon. This is Radio Ottery.
One of my first interviewees on Radio Ottery is Sally Sedgman, and I'm thrilled to say that I'm joining Sally in her rather welcoming house just on the outskirts of the town. And Sally's an acclaimed after-dinner speaker. She's made regular contributions to BBC Radio 4 and BBC Local Radio. But Sally, I wanted to start by asking you about your first job, because that wasn't really related to the career you later developed, was it? It was in Exeter Airport.
No, well, it was a very extraordinary time in my life, because I'd been at this high Anglican convent for 10 years, living away from home, where we were taught absolutely absurd things like how to perform a court curtsy and how to get in and out of a sports car without showing your knickers, and things like that. So though one of the nuns, who eventually jumped over the wall actually, wanted me to go to university because I was very, very good at English, I came home to live with my parents on Topson Road in Exeter and had to do a secretarial course. So I did a secretarial course in Exeter, and one of the jobs that was on offer was to be a typist at Exeter Airport. And I went to an interview, and I said, I remember now, I'm not going to say how many hundreds of years ago, but they asked me what wages I would like, and I said, would £5 be all right, which gives you some idea of how long ago it was, and I was actually employed. So I went to be a typist. I was very, very bad at it indeed, and I spent an awful lot of time typing the manuscripts of plays I was in and things like that, but I didn't like it at all. And when West Point Aviation opened up, it was absolutely extraordinary. They had one DC-3, Frank Mann the fruiter put up the money, Don Mann was the pilot, Don's daughter Geraldine was the first air hostess, and Jack Mann was the engineer. And then there was me. And they bumped into me. I'd had a horrible time Roneoing, that again is ancient, manuscripts, and I absolutely loathed it. And they just popped out of the door and said, Sally, would you like to be an air hostess? And I said, yes, please. Yes, I would like to be an air hostess. And I went, and now health and safety, I hope to God they're not listening. I went up in the air with 36 passengers, having done half a Red Cross lesson on bandaging the wrist, and in charge of 36 passengers. And every now and then the pilot would buzz me from the front and say, Sally, you know, DC-3s weren't pressurised. And he'd say, Sally, we're going to hit some turbulence. Would you go up and down the aisle and see if anybody's lips are turning blue? And they used to think I must be the only hard of hearing air hostess in the world, because I'd be engaging them in fatuous conversation, thinking, oh, please God, don't let their lips be blue, please God, because I haven't done oxygen. You know, so that was West Point Aviation.
So what started off as a career or a job not at all linked to aeronautical engineering, aeroplanes, flying, not anything like that. So being a typist, you got your foot in the door, and it ended up taking...
It ended off with me resigning, actually.
Ah, tell me about that.
Because, well, I did resign. I hope this is not litigious. I mean, it's actually going through your lawyers, you know, because... I felt that they went, because I was this amiable, confident girl, and obviously so patently honest, I did feel that some of the things, occasionally we brought our aircraft back to Exeter when perhaps we shouldn't have, and so my conscience pricked, and I did resign. But because I was so chatty and so amiable, they came to seduce me back with many boxes of chocolates and things, but I didn't go back. But I lived on that money when I went to the BBC, and I went to the BBC in London.
Ealing Film Studio, was it?
Yes, that was the only job that I could get. They actually, you know, massaged things for me because they wanted me in. And so I went to Ealing Film Studios to act as the film librarian at Ealing's secretary, and it was the most extraordinary place because having had such a programmed life, the BBC in those days, I was actually encouraged to call the film librarian, whose name was Brian Enright, I forget to this day, or remember to this day, by his Christian name, which was so avant-garde, and his deputy was a woman. And that was the first time I'd actually seen this a woman in a position of authority, really and truly. And there, at Ealing Film Studios, Z-Cars, which you'll have heard of from the annals of history, the first Doctor Who was filmed in Ealing Studios. So I used to go out on the train from my flat, which in those days too, I wasn't allowed to say was in Notting Hill. You weren't to say it was in Notting Hill, because that was such a terrible, terrible suburb. I had to say it was off Kensington Church Street.
Right.
And then go out to Ealing Film Studios. And all I wanted to do was slump about and go to sleep. But no, they had this idea, that they wanted to promote you if you had any kind of talent. But it's fascinating. This is the 60s. They thought in the BBC you had 6 months to absorb the job, 6 months to put in your own creative input, to refresh it, and in the next 6 months you ought to be looking to do something else, or they would headhunt you. And it didn't suit me, at all, because I wanted to go to sleep there forever and ever, amen, but not at all. They kept on making me put in for interviews. And one of the banes of my life, which we might come into, is my voice, which is now, media people say, oh, Sally, you're so lucky, because it's so distinctive. And I say, it's the bane of my life, because when I'm in Sainsbury's and I'm asking in one counter, where is the tea? Somebody 17 rows up will say, it's over here, Sally. Which from a media point of view, maybe is quite good, but from shopping and a normal everyday life. And that's why I won't speak on a mobile phone in public. I will not take my mobile phone out at all, because I think when the revolution comes, I'll be stoned. Sounding like me.
Yeah.
So the BBC,
And then it was Exeter.
Yes, well, I came home. I came home because, very sadly, my mother was found to have terminal cancer. And as an only child, I came home. And it was very, and very sadly she did die. But she had been an actress. And so this voice thing haunts me very, very much. Because my mother used to say to me, when we lived in Ireland, as I said, and we would go to an ordinary grocer's, Mr. O'Flaherty or something like that, and I'd push, pull on her skirt and say, Mummy, be quiet. And my mother would say, darling, my voice has been trained to get to the back of the stall. I see absolutely no reason to diminish it now. Rather like Edith Evans and Sybil Thorndike. And the horror of it, as all women will know, you grow like your mother. And my mother had been at RADA when it was called Trees Academy, after Sir Henry Beerbohm Tree. And so, of course, she'd had this extraordinary projection. And I wish to heaven I'd asked her how in 1916 she'd managed to persuade her father to let her go and do something as louche as trained to be an actress. And she changed her name from Nora Hopkins to Nora Vipon. She dug out a French grandmother.
Yeah.
Anyway,
oh, wow.
So right, we're back in Exeter, and my mother had acted in the 30s with an organisation called Mrs. Gamble's Players, a surgeon called Mrs. Gamble, who looked like Isidore or a Duncan, actually. And Mummy then came back to Exeter with my father and the Little Theatre Company. And she joined the Little Theatre Company, and she took me along with her, and was exasperated by me. I had my first role, which was a non-speaking maid, or I said something like, good morning, sir, and I had to hoover, and my mother's incredible voice came through the wings saying, you can tell that child never lifts a finger. Look at the way she's using the hoover. But I met my husband there. John Sedgman, I met my husband there. I had seen him before I went to London. And I said, golly, he's frightfully good looking. Why wasn't he around when I was living in Exeter? And my friends said, oh, no, he's incredibly pompous and pleased with himself. And I said, I think he looks rather nice.
Yes.
And listeners, I married him. And John has heard me say this, poor dear, late John has, that I got married because it was easier than getting a job. But, you know, but I did pass it by him. You know, I said, John, I'm so sorry about this, but a little bit of it's true. And another ghastly thing is that a great girlfriend, my best friend, was actually going out with him and used to come to me and say, oh, Sally, it's so dreadful. The relationship is not going at all well. I really can't understand it. And I'd go, oh, dear, I'm so sorry. And I was the third one in that relationship. And eventually we got married at Christe Church and apparently apocryphally, no, but it's true, when he proposed to me, and he never stopped rubbing my nose in it, I apparently said, yes, please. Which, I mean, is so un-women's lib. Anyway, so we came back to Exeter, and he went on practising as a lawyer at Staines, very successful, set up the litigation department. And I lolled about, going out to lunch and playing tennis and things. And then the absolute turning point in my life was when I went to a lunch party, and a friend of mine was absolutely shivering with excitement. And I said, Shan, you look amazing, what's going on? And I thought, well, in a public place, she's not going to tell me she's taken a lover. She's not going. And I said, well, what's going on? And she said she had been to creative writing classes. And it was like a bolt, because though I'd been so good at English, I started halfway through the term at creative writing classes, led by the legendary Judy Chard. And after weeks in, when I'd been silenced because I was so overawed by the talent, she said to me, Sally, you're very chatty out in the, out having coffee, but you're, silent. I'm going to start with you with a thumbnail sketch.
That conversation with her, the peripeteia of your life.
Totally.
And
changed my life.
And what happened then? What sketch did
Well, what I realised was I put it off. The classes were on Thursday mornings. And, I took the dogs for walks they didn't want. I cleaned the silver. I the back of my husband's shirt. I did everything to put it off. Everything. And then on the Wednesday evening, I sat down with what then was a typewriter, a manual typewriter, and I realised that I had a complete video memory. Whether or not that was being an only child in the Ireland of the 50s, everything rolled in my mind, and I started on my life in Ireland in the 50s, on my uncle who lived outside Cork, who used to have one of these hearing aids that was like slung on his chest, enormous, which was like a little sort of radio, really and truly, and I'd sit on his chest and he would sing Bing Crosby songs out of this, and this was when I was about 8 years old, how I would go to Irish parties, bespectacled plats, butter wouldn't melt, convent kid, and I'd be watching, this is what got me onto Radio 4, messages to myself, and I'd go home and write in my diary, Mrs. Mitchell Henry had at least 6 rather strong gin and tonics. I'd be watching everybody, and all this came out, and I stood up and said, I was so keen on this thumbnail sketch, and Judy Chard said to me at the end of it, the whole room had fallen silent, and she said to me, did you know you had talent? To which I replied, I didn't dare to hope. And she then said, but you do know, don't you, that won't be enough. And I had absolutely no idea. And Oscar, I will tell you now, as you will know, as a very talented young man at the start of your career, what it means is you have to have the hide of a rhino, because not everybody's going to like you. In fact, a lot of people, like when I appeared regularly on BBC Radio Devon with my column of Hot Air, lots of people absolutely loathed me, completely loathed me, and I'd go downstairs sometimes and the girls on the phone on reception would be picking up and I'd hear them saying very wearily, well, some people do like her. And I think, oh holy moly, that's more big boxes of chocolates for them. But all media people love you if you create a reaction. But what was very hard for me was the media person was so akin to how I'm like in real life. So if they loathed me as a media person, it's jolly hard not to take it personally. But then I had to fight to get on to BBC Radio Devon.
Talking of Radio Devon.
Yeah, I love Radio Devon. I owe it everything.
You initially applied to be a part of it, and what was the result? I've got written down, Sally, that they turned you down saying you're not chatty enough.
They did.
I don't believe that.
They turned me down. I sent a tape. Maybe I'd written from a script or something, and they turned me down because they said I was too stiff and not chatty. In those days, early 80s, maybe the voice might have had something to do with it. But it was very, very interesting because of the convent thing, and the fact, too, that women of my generation, the grown-ups always knew best. You didn't know best. But some divine intervention brought on a rebellion. And postcard, I wrote a postcard, and I said, I'm very, very disappointed that you don't think I'm any good, because in those days we used to take American paying guests at our previous house, and we had extraordinary people. We had a professor who was a professor of alcoholism and suicide from Berkeley University, California, and we had a chap who staggered in the front door and said, I gotta call Taiwan. I mean, we had extraordinary people, and I'd written it all out and thought, my golly, they must be interested in this. Nobody else has done anything like this. And they, as I said, I was rejected. So I wrote back. They were on the phone. My whole life changed within 24 hours. And I talked about my life in Ireland and the eccentric Duke of St Albans, who, when my father used to take round the collection plate at Killer Lane Church, would say, have you got change for £1, Owen, to my father? And my father would have to give him a 10-bob note. You know, weird things. And they came to interview me. And it all changed from there. They gave me about a second slot on alcoholism, on something or other. And then they built up and built up. And in the end, I started making regular contributions to BBC Radio Devon, as I say, to which I owe absolutely everything.
That was a column of hot air.
I used to call it a column of hot air. I didn't have my own programmes, and they used to have, you know, various presenters whose whole idea was to make me as discomforted as possible.
Looking it up,
yeah.
I've always thought that a column of hot air, you know, it's where sunlight comes down, it heats the ground, heats the earth, and the air above it, here it goes, it's forcing it upward, and the surrounding cold air is sort of pushed away, and we've got a column here of hot air, and that's what I thought.
That I warmed them.
Well, there you are.
Do you hope?
What inspired you to name your contributions?
I just thought it was damn clever. I mean, you're the first person who's ever scientifically analysed it. You're a young man of great analytical as well as palpable charm. But I just thought a column of hot air was ruddy good fun. Really and truly, I don't think anybody else called it, but when I'm doing my CV or anything. But I met these various people, and it was Douglas Marks, the much adored thing, who said that Stop the Week, Robert Robinson, Stop the Week, which was then very well known, on Radio 4 was looking, you know, for people, and he suggested that I went and did an audition for Robert Robinson's Stop the Week. So I went and did it, and I was chosen, you know, to be on it. And I mean, it was the absolute debacle. I mean, it was too soon. I wanted to be on Radio 4, and subsequently I was. But I just want to talk to anybody. You can do things too soon. And as you would know, it's not the disaster that counts. It's what you do with the disaster. I mean, I was absolutely outclassed. There was Sarah Harrison, the novelist, they're all his favourites. And there was me, dumped in. And if I hadn't said, I was silent, I was completely silent. And then Sarah Harrison, who was so kind and benign, said something brilliant and witty, and turned to me and said, and do you agree, Sally? To which I could only squeak, yes! And that was the only contribution I made. They didn't give me any quarter at all. They were quite, it was Laurie, Taylor, Sarah Harrison, Milton Shulman. It was all the grown-ups.
Did it change your view of your career, or did it sort of alter your view of broadcasting in general, or how did it affect you?
It was absolutely diminishing, because I'd really wanted to get onto Radio 4. I mean, I said to somebody who met me on the train, you know, if I could have hanged myself with my Hermes scarf in the ladies' loo, I would have. Because half of Devon had been listening, and they were extremely creative in their comments. No, it was a complete and utter disaster. But I just suggest to everybody, have other lifelines. And my beloved column of hot air still kept going. still kept going.
Now, you did return to Radio 4 later on.
Yes, I did.
But we'll talk about that later. Firstly, you toured the West Country.
Well, what was so exciting was that through the column of Hot Air, I did build up a following. But again, another thing you'll know too, with radio, it's a very extraordinary thing because you don't know if anyone's listening. It's a very lonely pursuit because you can't see your audience and your presenter is either filing his nails, you know what I mean, or doing something on a computer. So he's giving you he is giving you no feedback at all. So you have no idea if it's entertaining, if it's not. All the image I had was the girl on receptions going, oh God, another complaint. You know, so it came to me as absolutely extraordinary that I'd go out, and again the voice, and people would stop me and say they enjoyed it. So what happened was I was approached through Radio Devon, would I give a talk? And it's the beloved Townswomen's Guild in Exeter, would I be their guest speaker? And I'd never done anything remotely like it in my life at all, and my first instinct was absolutely to turn it down, because it's... But my husband, when I told him, said, well, you'll do it, won't you? And so it was complete. I said, yes, of course I'll do it. But the invitation came in September. The talk and their AGM wasn't until March, and I thought, oh, well, I'll probably die in the middle, so who cares? You know, but March came, and I did, and it was absolutely, completely and utterly petrifying. Absolutely petrifying. But I had one of my best stories that I knew before I leapt to my feet. We had a lunch first, so I had to be chatty because you've got to persuade. You know, the chairman might have invited you, but members of the committee are, you know, as one once told me later on, much later on in my career, she sat next to me and she said, I have absolutely no idea who you are, and I have no idea what you're going to talk about. But members of my committee assure me that on occasions you can be quite amusing. And this is the first time I ever slightly lost my temper, because my manners and charm are very important. And I leant to her and I said, you're extraordinarily lucky, I said, because on this occasion I do actually know who I am, and I have a vague idea of what I'm going to talk about. And that's the only time I've been rude. And I got up and it went incredibly well, and she did look slightly demolished, I must say, slightly demolished. And then I forgave her because she turned to me and she said, did you know you had laughter in your voice? And I forgave her everything. I forgave her everything. So I went to the Times Women's Guild, okay, and I was sitting there at the lunch, and a woman sitting across the way, which was the lady treasurer, who'd already given me an extremely hard time, because they always do this. I warn you when you become an international guest speaker. They always tell you how wonderful the speaker the other year was. I mean, they cannot resist it. You know, they don't actually say, well, you better be good. I mean, they did when I did a Christmas talk, because they'd had Victoria Wood the year before, and so they did kind of say, you better be good. Anyway, this lady, who'd humiliated me but didn't know it, of course, passed a note over to the woman sitting next to me, and I thought, well, it can't be get the speaker off, because I haven't actually started to speak yet. So I said, oh, you know, what's that? And she said, oh, it's a request for tickets, because we're having one of our big celebratory occasions in a few months' time, and she wants tickets. And I, of course, said, and are you going to have a speaker? To which she replied, oh no, she said, we want to enjoy ourselves on that occasion. So I knew perfectly well that though I was terrified, that was such a great anecdote. Anyway, I went on to do it. I said I must sit down. I said there was an old war wound, whatever, that I must sit down, because I knew perfectly well I could keep my arms strong and unshaking, but I was so frightened that my legs would shake. So I addressed them sitting down, and then I got 2 more invitations from that, and it went. And then I did the entire West Country, up to the Royal Crescent Bath, stayed there. I did absolutely everything to prove that the gift wasn't transitory. I had to prove it to myself that I really could do it. And the only thing is, being an off-to-dinner speaker, It's not like an actor that you have one sentence. You're the first spear carrier. So you say, yes, my lord, here is the spear. And then you have another year to firm up your craft. And you say, yes, my lord, here are 2 spears. You have to stand up as an after-dinner speaker and whack it to them. And there is no provision for that. There's no rehearsal. And they either get it or they don't. And you have to be so well prepared, because an audience will always surprise you. Something that has had them rolling in the aisles 9 times out of 10. On the 10th, they don't like it.
Or being thrown in at the deep end
is a nightmare.
And all this rejection and this huge amount of success.
Absolutely.
And after, this is touring the West.
Oh, absolutely, and wonderful fun. But I mean, at the Royal Crescent Bath and these posh hotels and that kind of thing, I remember before I even spoke, I went into the ladies' loo, and there were these women of such sophistication and glamour, and obviously of enormous wealth. And I just thought, I hope their senses of humour are mine. I can't believe, but mercifully they were. And then I decided I'd try and crack London.
That's my next question.
Yeah.
So how did this sort of West Country poshing about, speaking and making contacts, I suppose, and making friends
and being recommended.
Absolutely. And that led to London, and what happened in the capital?
Well, I always thought that London was where the grown-ups lived. I've always thought that. And because when I lived in London it was foreshortened because of my mother's illness, I belonged to a club. And there were new management in the club, and they wanted to use their beautiful boardroom. So I decided too that I'd do a workshop on public speaking, because I do that with no idea. Somebody said, and how did you target, your potential audience? And I thought, I didn't target anybody. And when it came to this, I had only 2 people who'd signed up. One was a high-flying businesswoman. The other was a mad lady poet who would write to me in red lettering with daisies all over the envelope and things. And I thought, how am I going to link this in? So I said to my friend's children who were in London, come, have lunch, pretend you don't know me, and every 30 seconds, Mama, isn't she marvellous? Isn't she marvellous? So in the end, I got the conference room fairly full of people. So I did that. It was a great success.
That was a cheek.
Well, I didn't know how difficult it was going to be. But then my flyer for this fell on an events organiser's desk. She introduced me to 2 women who did charity lunches at Mosselman's in the wonderful Belfry Club, and they wanted a speaker. So I spoke Chaos at Christmas. I was so frightened I could barely walk up the steps. I then had to fight my way. It was a success, thank God, to be included in their management team, because I found that I liked running the raffle, that I liked running the auction. They didn't. And so I joined them as part of their team. And the ladies who came to Mosselman's also belonged to Cliveden. So I went and spoke at Cliveden several times. And when it came to my TV series, which we'll get onto, we did the pilot. Actually at Cliveden. But London's quite difficult because they can get all the celebrities in the world, for nothing. Yeah. So you don't get money. Oh, but I did introduce Michael Parkinson.
Oh,
and all sorts of things like that. So I met lots and lots of and Tara Palmer Tompkinson before she dried out. And, so it was a huge amount of fun.
Yeah, and, before we chat about your television, there was a return to Radio 4.
Yes.
Did this show sort of fulfil your ambitions and lead on to other opportunities, or was it just something you wanted to do for yourself as a bit of fun?
It was the first radio station I ever listened to as a baby, really, because my mother listened to Woman's Hour. Those wonderful days when women, it was in the afternoon, and women had rests. My mother was, oh, moan, mothers of the world. My mother was 42 when I was born, and she would have a rest every afternoon, and there was this amazing called Marjorie Anderson, and Mummy would have a rest from 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd be put in a playpen to shut up and get on with my own life, as it were. And so radio, the home service, I adored even before the legendary Children's Hour and Uncle Mac and all those things. So radio was my first love, and Radio 4 was my first love. And I just saw this advertisement in, I think, the Radio Times that said, do you keep a diary? If you do keep a diary, be in touch. So I wrote to the PO box office number or whatever about my diary and my Irish childhood and the anecdotes of Mrs. Mitchell Henry. And the thing that got their attention was because at Ealing Film Studios, we'd gone for our lunch and drinks and things at a legendary pub which had photos of all the Ealing movie stars all over the walls. And David Attenborough was there. He was obviously making all sorts of programmes and everything else. And he did. He perhaps quite liked the look of me or whatever. And the sentence I sent to this box about your diary was, David Attenborough stole my sausage, which he did. And as you would know, whether it's vocally or written, you must catch your audience immediately. I mean, particularly as a speaker, you have got to assure your audience that they're in for a rollicking good time, because you just can't wait to speak to them, because then, I tell you, palpably, you can hear they expend a sigh of relief because they don't have to worry about you, you know, which most people do. And somebody once described a speaker to me who was so frightened that even the lapels on his pockets shook. And an audience does not want that.
No.
So I sent in all the staff, and months and months and months later, had to chase them up. It had all changed. It had gone from BBC 2, the guy involved, gone on to something else. But it eventually came to be this series on Radio 4. And I was one of the contributors to a fascinating series that involved an octogenarian, if not nonagenarian, diarist from America who'd known hundreds of American presidents and things. And then I was the fun one with the Irish anecdotes. And there was a woman, multiple sclerosis. I mean, we were a fascinating series. And I was chosen by Frank Delaney to head up Pick of the Week. And I mean, on my website, which is frightfully amateurish out there, but there are lots of quotes, you know, of people and the series, and it got a great plaudit.
And did you meet people through that?
No, not really. Well, they wanted me. The production team, terribly, Martin Veitz, terribly wanted me. That's why he took me to a fetish shop in Bristol. We can talk at a fetish shop, and this girl in the tightest rubber trousers you have ever seen in your life, and could only keep her keys and credit cards in a dear little purse down by her ankles, and the old Italian who used to crack the whip, and Martin, who was I had to keep on reminding him he was a father of two, that he was a married man and father of two, because I overheard him saying to this girl, I can get you on TV, you know. And I said to him, Martin, you have a very nice wife and 2 children. Behave yourself. And they put me in the thumb screws. They put me in the dominatrix bit. I didn't realise. I said, oh yes, that's all right. I'll go in the thumb screws. And then Emma, the girl all in the rubber and everything else. I said, oh, I don't want. And she said, ask me nicely. I know. I'd stepped into extremely seedy land, but they loved it. And this amazing Pete Atkins edited, you know, the legendary Pete Atkins, and Martin was thrilled with it and thought we were going to really crack Radio 4 with this fetishing and everything. And then again, timing, a lot's timing. And it was a new controller of Radio 4, James Boyle, and he didn't want any new presenters. It was a very, very sad, dark time for me, actually, because I'd really seen myself sailing.
Well, it might not have been a means to an end, your Radio 4 contribution, but it certainly was. It was good fun, and you can look back on it and
say, great anecdotes.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, great anecdotes and stories. But I did want to do more of it, and it's absolutely truthful and looks good on your CV. But I wanted it to lead. That's when the timing was wrong. I was assured, I didn't want to be arrogant, that the talent and the idea and the fun was there, but it just didn't work.
Well, again, we plummet into, after this massive zen of enjoying ourselves, plummet down into the nadir of times.
Of being rejected.
Well,
Come on, being rejected, being the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong material. I mean, that is a performer. That is what you have to surmount. And it's very, very tough. And now you understand why acting dynasties and that kind of thing pray that their children won't go into it. But the red graves, they do.
And how did you emerge from this low point and being surrounded by not knowing really what to do and where to go? How did you emerge from that and get back into broadcasting?
Well, I think rescued again by kind local ITV, which is sadly no longer down there in Plymouth, got used to me, and I mustn't be rude, but researchers like someone who's easy, you know what I mean, and I got onto the researchers thing, oh, Sally will have a quote, Sally will have this, Sally will have that, and that's how I got, a face and a quote onto local TV, and thank you very much. ITV and that sort of thing. And I did a screen test. And when I went to a screen test, the makeup girl looked at me and she said, "Oh," she said, "I've never used so much concealer before." Onto tube 2. Oh. And she made me look so ghastly that my own dogs, my dogs wouldn't let me in the back door. I mean, I looked rather like Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard. I looked horrific. But anyway, the screen test obviously worked and rolled forward, and I was very, very lucky to be invited to have my own...
Your own series?
My own TV series.
Tell me about that. How long did it last?
It was about 8 episodes, prime time. It was when Carlton was in charge of ITV down here. And I did social events, social commentary. I did things down here. I went to Ascot in London and did social commentary. I had my adored wish list of my beloved Brian Sewell, the art critic. And I know we're going, and my voice has always been the absolute bugbear of my life. Completely, the round vowels and everything, and I'd listened to Brian Sewell and adored him on any questions, because he'd actually said, "Poor vulnerable darling, I don't get much radio because I think it's my voice." And I immediately had this empathy with this man, and when I bumped into him on Green Park's tube station, I brought the whole place to a complete halt, because I went up to him and I said, "Brian Sewell, my name is Sally Sedgman, and you won't know me," I said, "but Brian, I think you and I ought to start a society for the protection of the round vowel." And having decided that I wasn't actually a doolally stalker, things, he said, "Phone me at the Evening Standard." And I swear to you, the whole of Green Park Station had come to a halt. And he stood there in the doors of the tube that eventually closed like the curtains on the stage. And there was this ripple of applause. And I'm sure, Oliver, if you haven't done it now, you will in future. You step back and you think, "Golly, I can't believe I actually did that." And in the end, I didn't get in touch. But when I had this series, I did. And I said, "Please, may I have Brian Sewell to come and talk about art? The Angel of the North and everything at Cliveden." And he came and was frightfully good, and we loved him madly. We absolutely adored him. But the best quote of all came when he was standing in reception. The cameras had gone, the mic had gone, everything had gone. And he stood in reception at Cliveden and said, "I think it was here my mother first snorted cocaine." And I thought, why didn't you say that?
Yes.
Why didn't you say that when you were on camera and mic'd up? But I mean, wasn't I lucky, to have a series? And then everything changed. ITV left the West Country. I mean, again, if we're honest, the viewing figures, it was that thing. There weren't enough people who liked me or understood me or whatever, so it wasn't, recommissioned. ITV left the area, but I still think it was astonishingly brave of them. Oh, and this my dear friend, who's sort of an agent as well, said to me, "Sally, how brave, how brave." And I said, "Oh yes, wasn't I?" And she said, No, Carlton.
Your series on ITV was called Hurrah! It's
Sally Sedgman. Yeah.
From there, in this, I suppose, more recent stage of your progressions and career, it's led on to you go and speak.
Oh, I've still got, and also the great excitement of my life, absolutely thrilling, is that I launched and host Michael Caine's, whose own career has become globally stratospheric. And again, being in the right place, in the right time. I was sitting in reception of the Royal Clarence Hotel, now Abode Exeter, and the series had been on only a year before, and Michael had seen me, and that, then led on to our launching and starting what is a very, very popular ladies' luncheon club, Ladies Do Lunch, at Abode in Exeter. And because I'd had all my experience at Mosselman's, Clifton, and the rest of it, and I can't say I was a shoo-in as a hostess, but it fitted very, very comfortably. And in November we'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary. And if I could have written a job description of what I'd adore, it's that, because it's the theatrical size and the ease of manner that goes with hosting an event. Because I present, I know what you need as a presenter, the reassurance, the sense of your own value to the occasion, which you very often don't get at all. I mean, they're far more interested in the floral decorations on the table and who's going to sit at the top table and have they got the guests they wanted to impress. I mean, the fact that you're going to take over half an hour and will possibly be a lasting impression, a little more than the chicken breast and the prawn cocktail, I mean, seems to pass people by. When I've learnt to sort of go and do a sound test and make sure people can see me and all that kind of thing. So it's wonderful. And because of Michael, because of the incredible Abode Group, who now have 10 or 12 hotels all over the country, and Andrew Bransell, the entrepreneurial hotel owner with his wife Christina owning Gidley Park. It's huge. But when we met in 2002, all of this was in the future. And I just am so lucky. I'm so lucky to be involved. I've met wonderful people. I have superb invitations. I'm speaking for Macmillan Cancer Care on the 3rd of October. And now 4 months before, they're sold out. I mean, I must be doing something right.
And these sort of stepping stones, if you like, in your career, you've had so many experiences, and what started out as you being not even an air hostess, a type
absolutely.
in an airport has led to one thing after another. And if you look back on your career to date now, is there one sort of moment or one role, if you like, that you've had that you'd like to experience again, and you say, "Oh, I'd like that to never go. I wouldn't like to change anything"?
I do like what I call standing up and showing off and talking about myself uninterrupted for 3/4 of an hour and getting paid. I do like, and I've always done it socially, and I do say that I think you can't be a really, really successful speaker. You can be a very competent, so that you're not shaking with the flaps on your pocket. You can be very competent, but every time there is an ingredient X, I think you've got to be a bit of a show-off, and you've got to have that absolute desire to share a story. I mean, I started just socially, stumbling into friends' lunches saying, "Golly, the most extraordinary thing has just happened to me in Sainsbury's." You've got to have the antennae to pick up an occasion, and most women do actually, that are fun. I mean, I was in Sainsbury's and the till had bonkered, so we were all lined up. And, you fall into conversation. And I don't know why, the woman behind me, we got onto it, and she said, "Do you know I've been engaged for 16 years? And I said, "Gracious, goodness me." I mean, I didn't actually even know her name. And I said, "Really, how extraordinary." And then she looked at me and she said, "Oh, but don't worry. We do the mucky stuff." I mean, to which there is simply no reply. as you adore words, I mean, in my head I thought, oh, that's good. There are two U's, mucky and stuff. That's awfully good. But to which there is no polite reply. So I think I said something frightfully convent-educated, oh, good. Good. And to my great relief, the till whirred back into action. But I think you've got to have antennae. And the thing that changed my life was that out from somewhere, I rejected BBC Radio Devon's rejecting me. If I had thought, they know best, because my convent had taught me that the cross indicated I crossed out. So this is as opposite to your generation and a whole loads of therapy that is to do with self-esteem. I am the last of the generation that they never heard of self-esteem. It wasn't at all important. You were a child, you were not important. The fact that you could carry that ignominy, and there are many, many adults now in therapy because of how they were treated, as children. So the cross was I crossed out, and I have had to struggle to persuade other people, let alone myself, that I do have something to offer. Our important thing, I think, well, mine was to be an adornment to my mother, the actress in Mother, who sat there saying, oh darling, it's so ridiculous, I can't find my glasses. Sally, do go and find them for me. And my cardigan. Sally, I've lost my cardigan. And then she would do the most highly sophisticated things that I always promised myself I was going to do. She would rest her cardigan on the back of her shoulders. Frightfully glamorous. I thought, oh, I'd love to do that. And she would also roll her cardigan sleeves up her arms that we weren't allowed, So, but you weren't anybody in your own right. You were not. You were this adornment to your mother, whom you worked frightfully hard not to disappoint. Another quote from my mother. Oh, darling, I do hope you don't grow any more. Boys don't like tall girls. It's so amazing. Coming from that sort of background, when you were bred to marry, really. But I'm a great, I hope, advocate, and icon's too wrong a word, but encourager for late development. One of my talks is, why did it take me so long? Sally Sedgman stumbled into the spotlight. Because it took me so long, because of the way we were brought up, because of my having to believe that any ability I had wasn't transient. And the most joyful thing of any speaker would say, well, if you're an entertaining speaker like me, I hope, is that you can see ripples of comprehension within your audience. And with my convent-educated one, I always have women who come up to me afterwards and say, I went to a high Anglican convent. I completely relate to what you said. And one of them said to me, do you know, Sally, you've reminded me that we could only eat a banana with a knife and fork. And the woman standing next to her said, a banana? We were never allowed a banana. Far too suggestive. But I had brought out in them all these anecdotes, and I wouldn't dream of saying I'm lucky enough, or anyway, to have inspired them. But if I could do it, and I didn't start till I was about 45, creative, my joy would be that people out there might think, golly, let me have a go. Okay, maybe not standing up and showing off, but I've always wanted to paint, or I've always wanted to do lace, or I've always wanted to cook, or do flowers in a more grown-up way. Age is no barrier, but I think since I started, age, and in the last 5 or 6 years, when you have Joan Bakewell, okay, this is fun, but when you have truly Esther Ranson and people who are inspirational broadcasters and performers who are, as far as I'm concerned, ageless, I think women can be inspired and say, if I've got the talent and ability, I'm going to have a crack at it. I think, thank God, I think it's more encouraging than when I started.
Was it always an ambition of yours to get in the limelight?
No.
It wasn't.
No, but I think as an only child, having been the centre of my parents' attention, and when I got to my convent, and I told you, had my 9th birthday, I was awfully little, and everything, I realised that the children, the other girls, didn't like me. They didn't like me at all, and I didn't like not being liked. And I analysed why they didn't like me, and it was because in those days, Joan Hunter Dunn, if you were good at German sports, that was how you became a heroine. I loathed either, couldn't do anything at all. And so I worked on what I was good at, which was writing and acting. So I had a reason for them then, to see something in me. And I wrote all those years later in the same self-deprecating style. And all my writing is domestic. All my writing is about what's happened to me. And that started at 12 years old, 10 years old, filtered through. And also, because I was an only child, I related more to adults. And I was probably rather dismissive of my peers, which is not a route to being popular. So I rejigged all of that.
I think from an outside perspective, from me listening to your career, and I think what summed it up nicely is the fact you've contributed to Radio Devon and Radio 4, and that's the BBC, and their sort of statement and mission, if you like, is to educate, inform and entertain. I think that's exactly what you're using your experiences to do, isn't it? To go out and speak, and you're educating people, you're informing them, and you're entertaining them. And I think that's quite fitting and quite nice that you've contributed to the BBC in that sense. You've done that, and you're using it as your own personal sort of experiences to do that for others as well.
If there are any listeners out there, this young man is a genius. The way he's summed it up like that, I have nothing to add. Nothing to add. That is one of the cleverest, slickest, best summaries of a rambling rubbish I've ever heard.
Sally Sedgman, thank you very much indeed for this last hour. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Watch this space with this young man. And as I say, ladies and gentlemen, when your face is gone and your body is gone, there's always a chocolate digestive as a seduction tool. Have a biscuit.
Thank you so much, Sally.